The broken comet sat like a rusted can at the edge of regulated space, just outside the reach of interstellar law, just inside the places smart folk avoided after dark. It wasn't much. A few steel tables, old neon signage flickering in half-dead loops, and one human behind the counter who spoke less than the lights did. Joe wiped a glass with the same rag he'd been using since the last war, his hands steady, his eyes tired. The place hummed with quiet, until the doors slid open with a hiss and the Tharkari walked in. 3 of them. Big. 8 feet tall if you counted the spines. They walked like they owned gravity, armor humming low with internal power. The lead one, bronze plates on his thorax, some kind of tribal etching carved across his mandibles, let out a harsh, clicking laugh. "This is the famous human tavern?" he asked in trade tongue, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Looks like a junk heap with a smell." His companions chuckled, mandibles grinding. One pointed at Joe with a clawed digit. "Look! It's true what they say, humans do leave the old to rot. That one's halfway to dust." Joe didn't look up. He kept polishing. The Tharkari stomped in like tourists at a zoo, curious and cocky. The second warrior dragged 2 tables together without asking, screeching metal on metal. He knocked over a chair and leaned down toward Joe. "Barkeep! Got anything strong, or is Earth's best just that swill you call beer?" Joe finally looked up. His gaze wasn't sharp or angry. Just patient. "Got black hole whiskey," he said, voice low but clear. "Made it myself. Most can't handle it." The lead Tharkari laughed again. "You think a human drink will stagger Tharkari blood? We drink venom at birth." Joe nodded once. "Sure." He reached beneath the counter, drew out 3 chipped glasses, and filled them in silence. The whiskey came out thick and dark as engine oil, the smell sharp enough to sting even alien sinuses. The first warrior lifted his glass and sniffed, visibly amused. "Smells like reactor runoff." They drank. One coughed. Joe didn't smile. The bar had quieted. Conversations at the back went still, patrons finding excuses to check exits or stare intently at their hands. Joe poured another round without being asked. The second warrior, still clearing his throat, glared. "What's the matter, old man? You think this scares us?" "Nope," Joe said. "Nothing scares someone who doesn't know what to fear." The third Tharkari slammed his empty glass down. "You mocking us?" Joe just tilted the bottle. "Another?" Their leader nodded. "Sure. Let's see if the myth matches the burn." The bottle emptied in the next round, and the warriors started loosening their shoulders, barking in their own language. One mimicked Joe, hunched and slow, pretending to wipe an invisible glass. The other 2 laughed, louder now. Joe said nothing. He stepped back toward the bar wall, one hand resting casually near the old metal console behind the counter. Without a word, he tapped it. The doors hissed shut. No one noticed at first. The hum of the locks wasn't loud. But the nearest patron, a Zythan courier with keen ears, stiffened. A faint flicker ran across the doorframe, defense seals activating. The third Tharkari finally noticed. "Why lock the door, barkeep? Afraid we'll leave before your little ego trip?" Joe shrugged. "Just makes the place quiet. Hate distractions when things get educational." The Tharkari stared at him, trying to figure out the joke. Joe didn't blink. "You know," the lead warrior said slowly, "there's a difference between serving drinks and trying to act like a soldier." Joe nodded. "There is." "Then know your place." Joe reached for another bottle. Not whiskey, water. He poured himself a glass, drank it calmly. "Funny thing about places," he said. "Some people walk into the wrong ones." That was it. No threat. No rise in tone. Just a simple sentence. But it landed differently. The bar had gone too still. The bartender wasn't fidgeting anymore, wasn't playing at hospitality. His eyes were too clear now. Too quiet. The Tharkari didn't realize what they'd stepped into. Not yet. But they would. The Tharkari leaned back in their seats, flushed from the liquor, laughter spilling into the stagnant air. One knocked over his glass and left it, amused by his own wobbling movements. The second swayed slightly, his armored limbs reacting slower than before. The third tapped a claw against the bar. "Got more of that poison, old man?" Joe slid an identical bottle from under the counter. "Plenty." He poured 3 more glasses without ceremony. The warriors raised them with mocking cheers. "To Earth's finest weapon, alcohol and arrogance," one joked before downing it in a single gulp. "You ever hear the story of Varnak 7? Joe asked quietly as he corked the bottle. The lead Tharkari smirked. "Another human tale? Go ahead, amuse us. If it's half as strong as this swill, it'll put us under." Joe wiped his hands, leaned against the bar. "It was a mining colony. Unimportant. Barely had a fleet. When the Trailon Syndicate moved in, most surrendered without a shot. But a few didn't." The second Tharkari chuckled. "Let me guess. Human resistance, armed with pickaxes and attitude?" Joe nodded once. "Close. 57 miners. No armor. No air support. Just stripped-down excavation lasers and a comm tower they converted into a railgun." The third scoffed. "Impossible." Joe didn't blink. "They held off 3 full Syndicate battalions. Sealed the canyon pass. Used geothermal vents to mask heat signatures. Took down 2 corvettes with improvised slugs." The bar quieted again. The tone had shifted, almost imperceptibly. The first Tharkari waved a hand. "No defense could stand against orbital bombardment. You expect us to believe this?" Joe stared at the glass he was cleaning. "They knew that too. So they hacked the targeting systems. Fed them ghost signals. Made it look like the Syndicate's own drop pods were full of hostiles. 1 frigate fired on its own." The third warrior's smile faded slightly. "How do you know all this?" Joe kept his eyes on the bar. "Because I was there." That hung in the air for a long second. One of the aliens laughed, but it came out thinner than before. You expect us to believe a withered bartender led a resistance?" "No," Joe replied. "I expect you to believe nothing. That's why humans win." He poured himself a glass of water. No shaking hands. No theatrics. "You think war's about strength," he continued, eyes on the counter. "But real war is about learning how to lose, and still not stop. You've never tasted dirt mixed with blood, rationed oxygen while listening to shellfire through a cracked helmet. We have." The first Tharkari leaned forward. "You say that like it makes you stronger." "It doesn't," Joe said. "It makes us dangerous." Another pause. One of the Tharkari blinked slowly, mandibles twitching. The liquor was working through them faster than expected. Their physiology wasn't built for it: thicker blood, inefficient filtration systems. The second warrior exhaled hard. "You humans think too highly of yourselves." "No," Joe said. "We think just enough." The first slumped slightly, his bravado dimming as his balance faltered. "You expect us to believe Earth stood against the Syndicate? I don't care what you believe. We didn't win because they were weaker. We won because they didn't understand what they were provoking. There's a moment in every fight where pain becomes background noise, fear becomes instinct. That's where we live." The third Tharkari's hand gripped the edge of the table. He opened his mandibles, but didn't speak. Joe kept his voice steady. "Most species escalate when threatened. Humans calculate. Not because we lack rage. Because we've already lived through worse." The lead Tharkari finally stopped moving. His breathing had gone shallow, muscles twitching under his carapace. Joe watched him for a moment, then looked away, as if bored. "I told you," he said. "Most can't handle the whiskey." The bottle stood half empty now, thick liquid clinging to the glass. The other patrons remained silent, watching without comment. Joe set the rag down, folded it with care, and tucked it away. "You came in thinking Earth was just another planet. Another race. But we're not a species. We're a warning." None of the Tharkari responded. The second Tharkari stood abruptly, knocking his chair to the floor. His stance was loose, but his tone sharpened. Enough games. You think parlor tricks and ghost stories give you power? Joe didn't answer. He reached beneath the bar and pressed his palm against a rusted panel. A soft chime sounded. Behind him, a recessed hatch clicked open, revealing a matte black locker. He opened it calmly. The first warrior staggered to his feet, trying to recover his balance. You trying to threaten us with props now, human? Joe lifted a battered, old earth military vest, faded emblems, frayed edges, a metal insignia etched with a thistle and crossed daggers. He slid it on, methodical. Each strap pulled tight, each movement practiced. The third Tharkari hissed, confused. That mark! I've seen that on syndicate records. Joe strapped a sidearm to his thigh. Not new tech. Old, ugly, and proven. He pulled a combat medallion from the locker, thick and scuffed from use, and clipped it to his collar. He took a small device from the shelf, thumbed it. A low-frequency pulse swept the room. The door seals flashed red. The bar's mood shifted. Not fear. Recognition. The second warrior lurched forward. What is this, some ancient costume? Joe finally looked at him. This is the reason you're not dead yet. A panel in the bar wall slid aside, revealing a mounted, obsolete-looking weapon, coil-driven, hand-linked to targeting systems embedded in the bar's walls. Joe touched a contact pad. Overhead, the lights dimmed. Surveillance-grade optics slid down silently from the ceiling corners. The first Tharkari's armor twitched, reacting. This place is fortified? Joe nodded. Was a fallback site during the Centauri raids. Converted into a station under civilian cover. You've had this set up all along? The third asked, voice edged now with something colder than anger. Didn't need it, Joe said. Till now. The first moved fast, lunging over the bar with a growl. Joe sidestepped, pivoted, caught the alien's arm with one hand and slammed it into the reinforced edge of the counter. Bone and chitin cracked. No flourish. No wasted motion. The Tharkari crumpled, wheezing. The second roared and reached for his blade. Joe pressed a palm-sized disc on his vest. A directed sonic charge fired, hitting the warrior's equilibrium. He dropped mid-stride, claws scraping uselessly against the metal floor. The third hesitated. Joe didn't give him a second chance. He drew his sidearm and fired, non-lethal, but strong enough to lock muscles. The alien dropped instantly, twitching in paralysis. Joe exhaled, slow and steady. Not rushed. Not winded. He pulled zip straps from the locker and secured the unconscious aliens. No one in the bar moved. The silence was thick now, filled with realization. He straightened, adjusted his vest, and returned to the bar. You walked in here loud. Told everyone what you thought of humans. Weak, soft, slow. He glanced at the downed warriors. But you never asked what we were before we picked up the bottle. One of the younger patrons at the back, a silent observer until now, finally spoke. You're not just a veteran, are you? Joe looked at him. No. There was weight in that answer. No need for elaboration. Everyone in the galaxy had heard stories about a human special forces unit deployed deep behind enemy lines during the Black Century. No insignia, no comms, no backup. Just results. The blackthorns. The medallion on Joe's collar gleamed faintly under the dim lights. He walked to the bar's rear panel again, entered a shutdown sequence. The security measures folded back into hiding. The weapon mount recessed. Lights returned to their default hum. Joe turned, looked around the bar. Humans don't brag. We don't posture. We don't come into your halls shouting bloodlines and strength. He poured himself a glass of water, drank half, then set it down. We wait. We endure. And if needed, we end things. No one argued. A few minutes passed before any of the Tharkari stirred. The leader groaned, tried to rise, and failed. His limbs twitched against the restraints, the aftershocks of the sonic pulse still disrupting his motor control. Joe didn't look at him. He was already behind the bar again, calmly restocking bottles, collecting shattered glass, his movements as unhurried as before. The patrons began to breathe again. Quiet murmurs rippled across the room. Eyes shifted between the slumped warriors and the old man behind the bar. Nobody dared speak too loud. No one laughed. The Zythan courier who'd sat in the back stood slowly, stepped closer. Why let them live? Joe didn't look up. Because they don't understand what they survived yet. He placed 3 clean glasses upside down on a towel. Killing them would have made them martyrs in their own eyes. Letting them crawl back out with broken pride? That teaches. The second Tharkari stirred, eyes unfocused. His mandibles fluttered as if trying to shape words, but only shallow wheezing came out. Joe noticed, turned, and tossed a rehydration ampoule toward him. It bounced off his chest and hit the floor. Drink that before your organs seize. It's designed for multi-species toxicity. You'll live. The alien stared up at him, stunned. You thought this was about dominance, Joe said, voice low, but carrying. It never was. You picked the wrong bar, on the wrong night, in the wrong century. The third Tharkari, still partially paralyzed, managed a slow blink. Joe moved past him, checking vital signs without ceremony. You're not soldiers. You're enforcers for a dying empire that never understood what it started. You fight loud. We fight final. He stepped back, washed his hands in silence. The water ran brown for a moment before clearing. Across the bar, a grizzled Brakari merchant lifted his drink toward Joe. Didn't think your kind still existed. Joe gave him a glance. We don't. Most retired. The rest didn't make it back. Another patron, an engineer with cybernetic eyes, leaned forward. Why here, though? Why this place? Joe dried his hands. This bar was never a business. It was a checkpoint. A dead drop. If things ever fell apart again, it would be a place to regroup. To remember. He reached under the counter and pulled out a small, worn device. He slid off its casing to reveal a communication crystal, pulsing with a dormant signal. Last operational beacon of the Earth Deep Operations Net. Gasps followed. That system had gone dark nearly 40 years ago. Most assumed it had been dismantled after the armistice. Joe stared at the pulsing glow for a moment before clicking it off and tucking it away again. I kept it quiet. Figured no one would come looking for ghosts. Someone in the corner asked. And now? Joe looked around, face unreadable. Now? Maybe someone needs to remember why humans don't shout about power. Because if we come back, it's not for ego. It's because something's broken beyond repair. He walked over to the lead Tharkari, who had begun to regain enough strength to sit upright. The alien's pride had drained away. His gaze no longer burned with arrogance, only confusion and recognition. Joe crouched, voice quiet. I want you to carry this memory. Not as a warning to your kind, but to yourself. You thought humiliation was the worst outcome. It's not. Walking out of here means you get to see what real restraint looks like. The Tharkari opened his mandibles but said nothing. Joe stood. Tell whoever sent you Earth hasn't gone soft. We've just been watching. Waiting. And we remember everything. No applause followed. No cheers. Just a deeper silence, one layered with weight. Joe returned to his bar, resumed polishing glasses. He didn't ask for respect. He didn't demand it. But in that moment, he owned every breath in the room. The doors remained locked. The Tharkari would leave eventually. Crawl out with their limbs shaking, egos bruised beyond repair. And when they did, they'd talk. About an old man. A bar. A mistake. And word would spread. The morning came slowly, filtered through the dim artificial skylights of the station's upper dome. The air carried the scent of ozone and dust, faint traces of power draw from long idle systems. The broken comet looked unchanged, same flickering sign, same chipped floor tiles, same crooked bar stools. But nothing was the same. The Tharkari had been escorted out before first light. None resisted. The walk was slow, silent. No parting threats, no final boasts. They couldn't meet Joe's eyes. They didn't try. Now the bar was quieter than usual. No ambient music. No hum of meaningless talk. Just a stillness like the aftermath of a distant storm. Joe cleaned in silence. Not a single sound came from him that wasn't necessary. He moved without urgency. He had no speech prepared, no declaration of victory. What had happened didn't need embellishment. A young trader lingered at the counter. He'd stayed after closing, didn't ask questions, just watched the place with new eyes. Joe finally glanced at him. Need something? The trader shook his head. Just trying to understand. Joe nodded once. Most people try. Doesn't usually help. I thought Earth was done. That the fire was gone. Joe poured him a drink, something mild. It is. Mostly. But there's a difference between peace and forgetting. The trader stared into the glass. You knew they were coming? I knew someone would, Joe replied. The galaxy keeps testing the quiet ones. Assumes if you're not shouting, you're weak. He leaned on the counter, his voice even. What no one gets is that humans don't need to win every battle. We only need one. And we make it count. The door opened again. This time, no warriors. Just a courier drone, hovering in slow arcs, scanning. It approached the bar, pinged the local network, and deposited a sealed data spike on the counter. Then it left without a word. Joe didn't open the spike right away. He looked at it for a long moment, then slid it into a drawer. He already knew what it meant. Someone had heard. Someone had paid attention. That old communication crystal had a listener after all. Behind him, one of the older patrons, the Braucari, grunted. You're drawing eyes now. Real ones? Joe nodded. That's fine. Some eyes need to see. He looked around the bar, as if measuring it anew. Not for size, but for readiness. For what came next. A few regulars stepped forward, quietly helping reset chairs, sweep debris, resecure hidden compartments. They didn't ask what for. They didn't need to. The shape of the place had shifted. It was no longer just a bar. The trader downed the last of his drink, set the glass down gently. What happens now? Joe replied without pause. Now? We serve drinks. Listen more. Watch closer. And if more come? They will, Joe said. Because weakness always invites pressure. But strength? Quiet strength, it draws different things. Fear. Respect. Sometimes allies. A pause. But always a test. Joe wiped the bar with the same rag. The silence returned, this time thicker with meaning. Patrons stayed longer than usual, lingering as though the bar itself had become heavier, rooted more deeply into something permanent. Word had already begun to spread, stations talking to stations, captains whispering in closed channels, hushed mentions of a human who didn't flinch, who locked the doors and reminded the galaxy what Earth used to be. The kind of story that starts as rumor and grows into legend. Joe didn't need to hear it. He'd lived through it before. He placed a small plaque above the bar. It wasn't flashy. Just a plain strip of metal with engraved words, barely noticeable unless you were looking right at it. For those who remember what silence can hold. No ceremony followed. No one clapped. But every pair of eyes in the room found it eventually. And not one person asked what it meant. Because by then, they already knew. Joe went back to polishing.